Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and very warm welcome to the Booms and Busts podcast. My name is Jonathan Davis. Today is Wednesday, the 9th of October, 2019. May I please remind you that it's not man against woman, it's not black against white, it's not rich against poor, it's not young against old, it's not gay against straight. It's the ruling class against the rest of us. And it always has been. On this month in history, on the 3rd of October 1990, they call the 3rd of October German Unity Day. They celebrate it in Germany. It's the day the West and East Germanys were united into one. After the unification, Berlin once again became the capital of Europe. Recently, on the 28th of September 2019, Billy Charlton in Sunderland, who had worked night and day to tell people about the Groomings, has now been imprisoned for inciting hatred and racism. That poor man was doing a public good, and the authorities, aka the police, have hammered him. He told the world how the police were not doing their job. Well, they have now, and they're laughing all their way to their pensions. 28th of September 2019 is a sad, sad day. He's been sent down for 17 months. Everyone think of Billy Charlton. October the 1st, Jimmy Carter, the US 39th president, became the oldest living former president when he turned the grand old age of 95. A great man. Of course, the media despise him and laugh at him. Peanut farmer, eh? What does that tell you about Jimmy Carter? He allowed Paul Volcker, the then Federal Reserve chairman, to raise interest rates and raise to extinguish inflation and the crap in the financial system. It's called capitalism. Look what they then did. In fact, on the September the 30th, in market history in 1981, the 10-year US Treasury interest rate peaked at an all-time high of 15.84%. The US government in 1981 was borrowing over 10 years at around 16% per annum. Do you think they borrowed much? Of course they didn't. They couldn't afford to. Today, nearly 40 years later, the 10-year rate is well under 2%. Do you think they borrow a lot? You're dead right they do, because the annual cost of borrowing is so much less. It's exactly the same with asset prices. If the cost of borrowing goes up, you borrow less, therefore you can't afford to pay whatever the asking price is on the house, so the house asking price has to come down. If the borrowing cost, the mortgage cost comes down, asking prices go up. It is that simple. And they tell us it's to do with, quote, demand, unquote. No, it's not. It's to do with the cost of borrowing and the ease or tightness of lending. David Miliband, we read, he is an ex-Labour cabinet minister. He earns $911,000 a year running are you ready for this, listener? An international refugee charity. It's called the International Rescue Committee. Well, isn't that just FAB? Stephen Kinnock's wife, who incidentally is the ex-Prime Minister of Denmark, She's paid £500,000 a year to run Save the Children. I wonder if anybody donating to Save the Children is happy about $500,000 in donations going to the avaricious Canucks, who, by the way, only pay 15% tax in Switzerland. That's nice, isn't it? Talking about avarice and taking the Michael, I talked about what really happened with Thomas Cook recently. Jamie Oliver took £4.5 million out of its restaurant chain and then it went bust. Funny that. He blamed Brexit. On October the 3rd, few things that the socialists do actually shock me, but this did actually shock me. On October the 3rd, June Sarpong, the director of Open Britain, Britain's biggest anti-Brexit campaign organisation, was appointed the BBC's Director of Creative Diversity. No doubt she'll be on a package of £300,000 or £400,000 a year, plus no doubt she'll have taxes and an entertainment expense account as long as your arm. Yes, really. On the more positive side, the new president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, a freedom fighter and a free marketer, he made a great speech in the United Nations in New York. He talked about things that no politician has done for many years, like Trump. He said political correctness and cultural Marxism have become global diseases, and they focused their attack on the institution of the family. Do we have a fight back? Well, here's hoping. I've got an awful lot to get through, so I'm continuing straight on. On the 23rd of September, I think the day I did my last podcast, we got a massive win for Israel and the Jews the world over. The United Nations has declared the BDS movement, quote, fundamentally anti-Semitic, unquote. The UN, quote, notes claims that the objectives, activities and effects of the boycott, divestment, sanctions, BDS movement are fundamentally anti-Semitic, unquote. The UN has also advised all member states to adopt the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, IHRA, definition of anti-Semitism. So far, 18 of the members have done so. I wonder if Britain and the US has done so. I'm sure the US has. I wonder if Britain has. I must check that out. The IHRA definition, which incidentally the Labour Party despises, specifies 11, quote, contemporary examples of anti-Semitism, unquote, while making it clear that there may be others, such as, and I'll just list 3 of them, calling for, aiding, or justifying the killing or harming of Jews in the name of a radical ideology or an extremist view of religion. I wonder who that can be talking about. Making mendacious, dehumanizing, demonizing, or stereotypical allegations about Jews as such, or the power of Jews as collective, such as, especially but not exclusively, the myth about a world Jewish conspiracy or of Jews controlling the media, economy, government, or other societal institutions. Denying the fact, scope, mechanisms, e.g. gas chambers, or intentionality of the genocide of the Jewish people at the hands of the National Socialist Germany and its supporters and accomplices during World War II, the Holocaust. I have to say, I particularly like that one Because they don't say the Nazis. They say the National Socialist Germany. Because that's exactly what Germany was. It was National Socialist, it was run by socialists, and the people who perpetrated these crimes were socialists. The UN would never have done this if Trump wasn't president. Obama, Bush or Clinton certainly would not have advocated against BDS. Boycott, divestment, sanctions. In light of this, I call upon the UK government to charge Jeremy Corbyn under UN guidelines on hate speech and anti-Semitism laws. He actively supports and promotes BDS activities. Hashtag anti-Semitism. He is but one of many. Dame Louise Ellman, a Jewish member of Parliament, Labour, faced yesterday a no-confidence motion debate. Do you know what yesterday was, listener? It was Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year for Jews. Yes, really. The motion castigated the MP for saying she, quote, understood, unquote, why Jews feared a Corbyn government. First, Luciana Berger. Then Margaret Hodge. Now Louise Ellman. When is the IHRC going to report on Labour anti-Semitism? This year? Next year? In the 2050s? Oswald Mosley was in the Labour government between 1924 and 1931 before founding the British Union of Fascists in 1932. Benito Mussolini was a leader in the National Directorate of the Italian Socialist Party until he founded the Fascists. He used black-shirt street thugs to beat up his opponents. Adolf Hitler of the National Socialist Party, aka Nazi, in Germany, was inspired by Mussolini. He had his brown shirts. Oswald Mosley was Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster in the Labour government. He used black shirts. Antifa dress in all black and have taken the madness one step further, wearing black face masks as well. Anyone who says to you that socialists are not fascists, just laugh. In Australia, a 12-year-old Jewish schoolboy was forced to kneel down and kiss the shoes of a Muslim classmate, or he would have been bullied to hell. In Australia, a 5-year-old boy was called a, quote, Jewish cockroach, unquote. A 5-year-old. And repeatedly hounded in the school toilets by other school children. Yesterday in Germany, 2 Jews were shot to death during Yom Kippur. As ever, the police do not know why. On the list of you couldn't make it up, the University and College Union, the UCU, Union of Marxist Lecturers, sent an email to secretaries of local branches encouraging them to mark Holocaust Memorial Day on the 27th of January. So far, so good. They provided a near-exhaustive list of minority groups who were persecuted by the Nazis. The email described persecution of, quote, trade unions, including social democrats and communists, Roma and Sinti people, beggars, alcoholics, drug addicts, prostitutes and pacifists, black people, disabled people, those with physical as well as mental illness, Freemasons, gay and lesbian people, Jehovah's Witnesses, non-Jewish Poles and Slavic POWs. They didn't mention the Jews. These socialist lecturers support BDS and are racists, and they are lecturing to your children. I hope you're sitting down, listener. Last week, it was reported in the national press that a woman spoke for the first time about how she was raped repeatedly and how she was let down by the police. Using the name Jennifer, who is now in her 40s, she said she was repeatedly arrested for prostitution, and by the time she was 19, she had 52 convictions. She was in fact targeted by a grooming gang in Tilford, Shropshire. Tilford. Jennifer was 11 when she was first introduced to her rapists by a boy she was seeing, who introduced her to an older relative. This is how they do it, listener. They then let their friends gang rape her. She was one of many girls who were drugged, beaten and raped by this gang as long ago as the 1980s. Jennifer said she would be raped by up to 10 men every night. She was raped by 500 men over 7 years. Well, I say men. They're animals. They're barbarians. These are not men. This poor lady, Jennifer, is now a mother. She said that when she went back to school, they were told she had missed too much, so she didn't attend school from the ages of 14 to 16. Very few questions were asked about her absence, so the abuses continued. Can you imagine being this teenager, having no one support you, and having this done to you every night of your hell life? Having fallen out of the system, she was then taken across the country by an older man so that she would be raped by strangers. She said, quote, "He locked me in a flat with iron bars for days. I was told the police thought I'd been abducted, but they did nothing." Unquote. Eventually he was arrested, but the case was dropped. He turned up again at her house with a shotgun and threatened her. West Mercia police said the case was unsuccessful because officers could not identify the rapists. Wasn't her word good enough? That was the bulk of a media piece in the mainstream media last week. And I apologise for this word, but the bastards who published that don't say who did it. What I will say is, across the country, we know that 90% of these groomings, rapes, paedophilia was and is Pakistani Muslims. Who's looking after your daughters, listener? I went to UKIP's annual conference at the end of September. It was very interesting. There was some seriously great speeches. Katie Hopkins, one of my two heroines in life. The other one being the Saint Margaret Thatcher. She got rightly a standing ovation. David Curtin, a guy I'd heard of previously. I knew he was in the London Assembly, but I'd never seen or heard him. Well, I'd seen photos. Again, absolutely spectacular speeches. I wonder why he didn't try to be the leader of the party. Neil Hamilton gave an excellent speech, although he kind of let himself down during the National Executive Committee questions question session later on. Robin Aitken, ex of the BBC, talked about the Marxism in the BBC. He's written books about it. It was a fabulous venue. It was the International Conference Centre near Celtic Manor at Newport in South Wales. Pretty well brand new, and indeed it still had some teething problems. A brilliant venue. They spent a fortune on it, but I was really disappointed that because it was taxpayer money that they didn't spend even more money on it. Where were the gold toilets? It's a taxpayer funded facility. There should have been gold toilets. They didn't spend enough of our money. But how interesting what's going on in UKIP. This is open knowledge. Just go on to, for example, Kipper Central, .co.uk. You can read all about it there. There are essentially two major factions in the United Kingdom Independence Party. One faction wants the party to be Tory light, which seems to me to be ridiculous because there is already the Tories. There is no market for another centrist party. And these are the people that do run the NEC and largely therefore run the party. And the other faction, the other side, wants the party to be free speech, which is what Gerard Batten wanted to bring in when he was leader of the party. They've elected a new leader, Richard Brain, really a great performer on camera. You should check him out. Very, very good performer, no question. And I am very skeptical of these things. And if I see a con man, I know it. And this guy's very good. And it's amazing. He appointed Gerard Batten, who was the leader, as his deputy leader. The NEC rejected it. He appointed a chairman. The NEC rejected it. It's absolutely remarkable. They're not letting the guy who, in a list of 4 candidates for leadership, he got 53% of the vote. I mean, that's an overwhelming majority. They're not letting him lead. There's NEC elections at the end of this month when I think 7 of the 12 positions become up for re-election or change, as it were. And it'll be very interesting to see what happens post that election. If you do go on Kipper Central, have a look at my own article which I wrote there, which I basically talk about UKIP needs another USP because the one that UKIP had, Leave, has of course been taken by the Brexit Party and indeed now the Conservative Party. So it's no longer UKIP's USP. If UKIP wants to be relevant, it needs a USP, and that USP needs to be solid and worthy. As you can imagine, for me, it should be freedom of speech, free markets. That's all you need. Freedom of speech, free markets. However you phrase it, that's what the USP should be. And as far as I'm concerned, there's a huge part of the electorate who'd be very attracted to that message. Talking of Brexit, well, it's clear now from what Merkel, Varadkar and Barnier are saying, that the Northern Ireland backstop was always to keep the UK in the EU, or at least split the island of Ireland from the UK. Now, personally, I'm not particularly adamant that the UK should always be the 4 countries, but it is inappropriate, to say the least, that if we're leaving the EU, we have to give up part of our country. I mean, it's utterly nonsense. But that is, of course, what the EU want to happen. Now, as for Boris's proposed deal, well, let me list to you the problems. We pay them £39 billion. For the next 2 years, we're still in the customs union and the single market. 8 years, we're in the European Court of Justice. We hand over our defence forces. Northern Ireland is in the customs union for 4 years, or forever if the people of Northern Ireland don't vote to leave. Well, excuse me, that's not a proposed deal to leave. That's insane. What if Boris gets run over by a bus? There's a laugh. What if he dies? What if he leaves the Tory party? What if? We're still in the EU. No, we have to leave. Lock, stock and barrel. If we are even a scintilla still in the EU when apparently we leave, I can assure you they will bring us back a few years later. I can guarantee it. Steve Baker, Jacob Rees-Mogg, most of the European Research Group of the Tory party support this deal, or this offer. Can you imagine it? It's not a deal. So, as of yesterday, we have another prorogation of Parliament. Boris, no doubt, next week will send the letter to Brussels asking for an extension. Then what? He gets a response of an extension and he ignores it and we leave on the 31st? Or what? They say we would then have a general election, but Parliament is adamant not to have it. And the Fixed Term Parliament Act requires 2/3 of the Commons to vote for a general election. That's not going to happen. So what's going on? Anyone who says they know, that they think they know, is a charlatan and a liar. I'm hearing that on the 19th of October, Parliament will vote on no deal and revoking Article 50. Well, that again is interesting because Rees-Mogg has said that Article 50 and EU law supersede the Surrender Act, the Ben Surrender Act, which says that we've got to ask for an extension. So, on verra, because I certainly don't know what's going on. I don't know anyone who knows what's going on. And by the way, the European Court of Justice ruled yesterday that the European Union can lawfully suppress political criticism of its institutions and leading figures, sweeping aside English common law and 50 years of European precedents on civil liberties. This is the EU. There are 4 principles about freedom of this, freedom of that. Total lies. As Europeans, they have grown up never to uphold or follow laws. They need everything written down because they look for loopholes. We in Britain, we always uphold and follow laws. Hence, we don't need everything written down. We keep to the spirit of the law. That is why the UK should never be in a formal union with these people. We are different. They lie that Churchill wanted the UK to join a European community. He said a European community would be great, but without the UK. In 1940, as the war raged on, a faction in the war cabinet considered a vote of no confidence in Winston Churchill to replace him with Lord Halifax, who would then sue for peace with Adolf Hitler. Now, where have we heard something like that? Churchill said in 1940, "We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall never surrender." In September 2019, 329 Remainer MPs voted in favour of the Ben Surrender Act. They have brought shame on our Parliament. In France, home of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, for the 47th Saturday in a row, the Gilets jaunes, the yellow vests, demonstrated to the stunning silence of our mainstream media. Hong Kong. Chief Executive Lam has invoked the Emergency Regulations Ordinance. I mean, we're talking dystopian future today, are we not? Ostensibly to ban face masks in protests. They've got a lot of quick-thinking cameras in Hong Kong. Next, there'll be no cash withdrawals, there'll be no human rights, there'll be no habeas corpus, they'll turn off the internet, they'll seize private property. Lam is, of course, just doing the job of President Xi, the supreme leader of China. You know, it's amazing, but there's a company by the name of China Shipbuilding Inc. It builds China's warships. It's just raised $1 billion to begin building a second aircraft carrier. And who provided most of the funds? US investment funds. Wall Street. Wall Street is literally building China's warships. Literally. Why do you think Wall Street and the media hate Trump? China just had massive celebrations of 70 years of communist rule. It's Maoism, it's fascism, it's anything but freedom and for the people. And the media love China, and as I say, they hate Trump. South Park, you know, the TV show, criticised China's state-enforced censorship and the Western companies who go along with it, as well as the elimination of democracy in Hong Kong. China has banned South Park. A professional basketball coach in the US tweeted about Hong Kong losing democracy. The National Basketball Association disowned him. The owner of the team annihilated him. That owner is a multi-billionaire Chinese. China is exporting communism to America, and the financial and industrial elite is happy to take it all on board. Go, Mr. Trump, do your bidding. Every student that attends the University of Sheffield will now be forced to attend classes on climate change and sustainable development. This is not education. This is indoctrination. A university in the UK is forcing students to attend a mandatory screening of a play about sexual consent. I say that campus rape culture is a myth. The University of Essex has such a low opinion of its male students, it thinks they need to be taught not to rape. Do you note that Greta and the Extinction Rebellion socialists take on the West about carbon emissions and etc.? Yet what we do pales into insignificance with what China and India do in terms of pollution. Not a word said against them. If you need any evidence at all that their protests have nothing whatsoever to do with the climate, there is your evidence. It's about socialism, which leads to fascism. And by the way, a global network of 500 scientists and environmental professionals prepared a message for the EU and the UN. It was entitled, "There is no climate emergency." Have you heard about it? By the way, climate children, when placing blame and pointing fingers, remember this. It was the older generation that introduced recycling to keep up with the demand of consumption from your generation. When they were kids, the only fast food was at the local chippy, and it came wrapped in newspaper, not polystyrene. The energy drink was Lucasade in a glass bottle. It was taken back and recycled. They walked or biked to school or work. They didn't ask mum or dad to drive because it was raining. They didn't want to get wet for 1,000 yards to the school gate. They wore hand-me-down clothes. They used a payphone to make a phone call. They remember power cuts on a regular basis. They played board games or read by candlelight. Their homes had single glazed windows. They would ice up in the winter. They shared their bedrooms. Their bedrooms were so cold you could see your breath with brothers or sisters. There was no central heating. Have you ever had anyone use someone's bathwater? They did. They didn't have TVs in their bedrooms left on standby 24 hours a day, or mobile devices that have to be charged if, oh my God, the power has gone down below 60%. Oh no. Holidays were in the UK, not in Ibiza. They didn't get there by plane. It's you that is the mass consumer that demands the latest phones, fashion, sunny holidays, fast food, transportation. Point the finger of blame at yourselves, you self-indulgent, deluded, needy, greedy, ignorant, unapologetic, rude, selfish generation. Two things pulled modern humanity out of extreme poverty: capitalism and fossil fuels. What two things do the far left oppose? I see more and more of our high street is struggling. Well, as I've been saying for many, many years, what it's going to lead to, the huge property price economy is coming home to roost. The rents that these retailers have to pay, you would not believe it. They are beyond eye-watering. And the powers that be want even higher property prices. There's politicians for you. Can I just remind you that Barack Obama, Al Gore and Henry Kissinger won Nobel Peace Prizes, but not Edward Snowden or Julian Assange or Donald Trump or Benjamin Netanyahu. Hong Kong is the home to the highest number of ultra-wealthy adults, defined by those who have assets of more than $30 million, relative to the general population. Globally, in 2018, there were 265,000 ultra-rich adults. And by the way, 30% of them were in the US. Well, all I can say is, thank goodness central banks and politicians believe in capitalism for the masses and socialism for the ultra-rich. Isn't that nice? Who invented the state pension? I'll give you 5 seconds. Ding! It was Germany's leader Otto von Bismarck in the late 1800s. He was threatened by Marxists who he thought were going to take over, so he started what ultimately was forced retirement with a pension at age 65, so that he created job opportunities for younger unemployed workers. By the way, Otto von Bismarck, what you should have done was brought in free market capitalism. And it's interesting, we've bought into the concept of retiring in our 60s ever since. Interesting, yeah? These countries' laws call still to kill gays. Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Somalia, Nigeria, Qatar. These countries sit on the United Nations Human Rights Council. Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Somalia, Nigeria, Qatar. In the UK, Jihadi Jack's parents received £122,000 in legal aid, while victims of terror, nothing. The parents were then convicted of sending him money. In effect, the UK supports terrorism. I'm now going to present the second part of the Miami Herald's account of the monster Jeffrey Epstein and his many accomplices, in particular Ghislaine Maxwell, Robert Maxwell's daughter. The apple doesn't fall very far from the tree. Let me remind you that for 2 decades Epstein built a sex trafficking enterprise that reached across state borders and spanned the globe. Using an almost bottomless quarry of wealth and connections, he not only employed recruiters around the world, but enlisted the help of an array of seemingly legitimate people, from hairdressers to psychiatrists to immigration lawyers and dentists. Before I continue, I want to remind you that Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, had Epstein and Maxwell to shooting parties at Sandringham House, the Queen's country retreat in Norfolk. It was said in official accounts, quote, "It was Jeffrey who taught Andrew how to relax," unquote. Why did he and Sarah split up? Another Sarah Ransom, a victim who we heard about last time, said at one point when she was on the verge of a breakdown, Epstein sent her to a psychiatrist to whom she confided, of course, about the abuse. He did nothing except put her on lithium. She said, "I find it so funny with all these people after Jeffrey was arrested saying, 'We didn't know. We didn't see anything.'" In 2019. Jeffrey was always surrounded by girls. Always. And these weren't normal girls. You could see it in our faces. We were damaged. We were medicated. How can you sit in front of a group of girls with Jeffrey and say, "We just didn't know"? You had to know. Epstein, 66, was found hanged on August 10th at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Manhattan, where he was awaiting trial on sex trafficking charges brought in July by Jeffrey Berman, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. It was more than a decade after the federal investigation in Florida ended in frustration. His death was ruled a suicide. 2 or 3 podcasts ago, I pretty well proved that is almost impossible, that it was suicide. And therefore, it wasn't suicide. Because everyone involved in this who were raping young girls and paedophilia, very powerful people in the club that you are not a member of, they know that he was going to go for a plea bargain and he was going to spill lots of black book beans. Of course, they had him murdered. Of course. The attorney Berman began investigating Epstein following the publication of a series of stories in the Miami Herald, from which I'm reading. They entitled this series "Perversion of Justice" in November 2018. Shortly after the series was posted, Epstein began transferring large sums of money to at least 2 people suspected of being involved in his operation in an apparent attempt to prevent them from cooperating with authorities. With Epstein now dead, federal authorities in New York are targeting Epstein's alleged Madam Ghislaine Maxwell and other possible co-conspirators, as well as looking at others in his orbit, including lawyers and doctors who may have helped him. Well, that's all fine and well, but he was murdered many weeks ago. We've heard nothing about arrests. We've heard nothing about taking in for questioning. We have nothing. It's like the Las Vegas shooter, the biggest terrorist shooter in US history. Within 2 weeks, we stopped hearing about it. It is unbelievable. It is, wow. The main journalist, Edwards, she said it would be almost impossible for those around Epstein to not know that he was abusing and exploiting underage girls and young women. In her year-long investigation of Palm Beach multimillionaire Jeffrey Epstein, reporter Julie Brown tracked down more than 60 women who said they were victims of abuse and revealed the full story behind the sweetheart deal cut by Epstein's powerhouse legal team back in 2008. Since the Herald published Perversion of Justice in November 18, a federal judge ruled the non-prosecution agreement brokered by then South Florida U.S. Attorney Alexander Acosta was illegal. Acosta then, of course, went working for Barack Obama. Well, of course he did. Epstein was recently arrested on sex trafficking charges in New York State. Acosta resigned as U.S. Secretary of Labor, and Epstein killed himself, so they say, in his Manhattan jail cell. Quote, to hang out with him with any degree of regularity, you had to generally know what was going on. You had to know these are people that are in his life only for sexual purposes. And you have to wonder how voluntary it really was and how he was pulling it off. If you were with him on one weekend and you were with him the next weekend and it's a whole different crew of females, some of which you clearly couldn't tell were under 18 or over 18, which is the minimum age for consent in the US, it's just impossible to have been completely in the dark about what was actually happening. I think people turned a blind eye because they were getting his money or they really knew what was happening. Over the past 10 years, Edwards has interviewed close to 100 of Epstein's victims, estimating that about 30 or 40 of them were over the age of 18. You can take the story we learned of Epstein back to 1993 or 94, and even then he had more of a type, where if he had his preference, he would want, for sexual purposes, the age range of 14, 15 or 16. That's just what he preferred, Edwards said. But also, to be seen in public, that wasn't acceptable, even as brazen as he was. So throughout the last 25 years, he's also always had women that exceeded that age range up to, say, 23. Edwards said neither Epstein nor his recruiters were ever direct about the fact that he wanted sex. In fact, Epstein preferred to manipulate them into believing he was going to be their savior. Where have we heard all this before? I'm going to leave it at that point because I've got other things to present, and I'll come back to it in round 3 next time. If you want to discuss any of these issues or any issue at all, email me at jd@theboomsandbustsshow.com. Tweet me at boomsbusts. If you don't follow, please do so. There's some really good conversations going on. If you're new to this podcast, the easiest way to get it in future is to go on to audioboom.com, click listen, search Booms and, that's all you need to write in. You'll see it there. Click on it, click subscribe, and then it will be sent to your device every time I publish. Economics. You know, we hear recession everywhere. Well, let me tell you that this year the US, according to Bloomberg and LPL research, will grow 1.5% to 2%, and next year 2 to 2.5%. The Eurozone will grow about 1% this and next year. The globe entirely will grow around 3% this and next year. So if the globe is going to grow 3% next year and this year, how on earth do we have a recession? The answer is we don't. And by the way, if the globe is going to grow 3 and the US and the EU is going to grow under 2, how is that possible? It's because emerging markets are going to grow about 5% this year and about 5% next year. When I look at the chart of emerging markets against developed markets, what I see is a multi-year bottoming process, a basing process which largely started in 2013, and soon we are going to see the breakout of breakouts, and Brazil, Russia, India, China, Korea, they are just going to take off big time against developed markets, the share prices. You know, in 2007, everyone was bullish on stocks and emerging markets. They said China's going to build 1,000 Chicagos. Well, the market capitalizations of emerging markets to, in essence, their book value, we'll just leave it at that, was 3.1 times. Well, in 2017, they said we're going to have global synchronized growth. It was only 1.9 times, so even cheaper. Bearing in mind, this was after a massive crash and global growth was getting going. This year, they say emerging markets is left for dead. They hate emerging markets. Well, that's funny because the price to book is only 1.3 times. It's practically a third of where it was in 2007. Emerging markets are very cheap. And if you're not investing in emerging markets for your pension, you're not doing it right. The Bank of America Merrill Lynch Global Fund Manager Survey is for September 19 is hugely bullish. US stocks and hugely bearish. Energy stocks, global stocks, UK stocks. I love it. Because these fund managers are rarely right. Some markets trader bloke, as in financial markets, not fruit and veg, he tweeted, going for 30% gains is hard. 3% in a day is extremely difficult. I tweeted back, I must be toast because I'm aiming for 300% in some assets. And yet 300% returns over a few to several years is entirely achievable. Look up the fat pitch strategy. Energy is the least attractive sector in the markets. According to the fund manager survey, energy stocks is one hell of a fat pitch. Just give it time. How many minutes? 55 minutes. Econ, biggest publicly traded energy company in the world, relative price to the S&P 500, it hasn't been this cheap since the 1970s. Well, you know, what can I say? Have you subscribed to the Booms and Busts report yet? If not, I tell you, you're missing out. There's 1,000 people who get the B&B report. It goes out every couple of months. I sent it out a couple of days ago. If you want it, it's free. Go on to jonathandaviswm.com, subscribe to the Booms and Busts report. It'll give you some brilliant detail and background to what's really going on and worth investing in for your pension. quotes and statements. I love this one. Anarchism is democracy taken seriously. Edward Abbey. St. Margaret. There can be no liberty unless there is economic liberty. Where does true happiness come from? I think that's the $64 million question. I've seen people search the ends of the world looking for it. What if I changed jobs? If only I had more money. Everything would be better if only... What happens when you actually get it? The new job or a few £1,000,000? True happiness? No. After a few months, it's right back to where you were. So if that's not it, what is it? It's inside us. It all starts with understanding and accepting who and what you are. Embrace your journey and everything that makes you unique. Life goes in cycles. It has ups and downs. My therapist, told me to write letters to the people I despise and then burn them. Well, I did that, but now I don't know what to do with the letters. A few years ago, I was on a long-haul flight between two screaming, almost demonic children. I pleaded with the stewardess to move me away from them for the sake of my sanity. She refused on the ridiculous grounds that I was their father. And on that note, thank you for listening. I'll see you again. Bye.